A reading from the Gospel of Mark. They came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to Jesus and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village, and when he had put saliva on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Can you see anything?" And the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then Jesus sent him away to his home, saying, "Do not even go into the village." And there it is again, the messianic secret. As I said when I was preaching on something similar last week, scholars have all sorts of ideas about how we should understand Jesus' demands about secrecy. This blind man whose sight is restored isn't even to go into his village. I'm always curious about the details that sit around these stories, particularly in Mark's Gospel, because Mark is a man who really likes his details. Mark is the man who, for instance, when Jesus is asleep in the boat just before the storm brews up and he has to calm it, Mark is the one who tells us that Jesus is asleep on a pillow. Luke and Matthew don't seem to think the pillow needed to be recorded for posterity. Mark likes his details. And the really curious detail we get is that it takes Jesus 2 goes to restore this man's sight. Hey, this is the Son of God. We've already, by this point, seen him do all sorts of healings. And he needs a second attempt. What could that be about? Maybe Mark is stressing for us Jesus' humanity. Certainly, out of the 4 evangelists, Jesus' humanity is the most apparent in Mark's Gospel out of any of them. Maybe it's something about the man. Maybe it's the fact that he cannot spiritually himself look intently until God looks intently at him. Maybe there is stuff about who and what he is, stuff that he needs to clear out of his head, his nature, his soul, whatever it might be, that prevents him from his ability to be healed, stops him receiving the fullness of God's grace. I don't know what it is, but it's something about which I feel very curious, because often when I look in the mirror and I hear and am reminded of God's love for me, yeah, it makes me behave better, but it doesn't always make me behave wonderfully. Sometimes I'm conscious that even knowing the gospel stories so well, sometimes I only present second best as a Christian, if not 20th best. And God calls us to do better than that, even if it doesn't come naturally and it isn't easy. This strange healing story of the blind man who at first sees the people who look like walking trees, maybe those walking trees are a reminder to us that God really is doing God's part as hard as God can, and we ought to make sure that we live up to the gift and the promise that is within us. Amen.